At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jah.
And I am Anthony Sie, and a pleasant welcome to Focus on Liberia. This is our program, Roundtable Africa, always hosted here by Edward Amara. Mr. Amara is Focus on Liberia West African correspondent who has been dissecting the issues of Africa, latest developments in Africa, be it political, economic, or any issue of human interest happening on the monocontinent of Africa. If you are just joining us, we want to say again, a pleasant welcome. Do us a favor and share the broadcast with somebody. The topic for today is quite interesting. Many of you are not happy about the African story, a continent endowed with natural resources, a continent that has the highest number of youthful population, and yet it lags behind in terms of development. Living standards across most African countries are just unacceptable, to say the least. Africa, like China, or China, like Africa, was in the same situation. As recent as 1978, China was having a very tough time economically and politically. But China has been able to change its story. So today's topic is how Africa, like China, can change its story. It is widely believed now that China has changed its story of poverty, backwardness, undevelopment, diseases, and has become an economic power in the world today. The Chinese are doing well when it comes to education. The Chinese are doing well when it comes to technology. In fact, they are investing in a lot of African countries like Malawi, South Africa, and many other countries like Kenya. How were they able to pull this off in just few decades, and Africa has not been able to do so. Our correspondent Edward Amara just returned from China. He and many other young people in Sierra Leone were selected by the government of Sierra Leone and sent to China to learn the Chinese experience and come back to Sierra Leone as young people to have the idea that any group of people can change their story of poverty to progress, to prosperity and development using technology and using their cultural value and everything. Edward has returned and he has gained significant experience and he's here to answer the question how Africa, like China, can change its story. At this time, I will welcome Focus on Liberia West African correspondent, Mr. Edward Amara. Edward, how are you doing? How was your trip in China?
Thank you very much, and I want to send my warm greeting across our numerous fans that normally watch and appreciate our program. The trip to China was one absolutely staggering in terms of the emotions that we felt. It's the one that has definitely created an indelible memory in my person. It was so fantastic, and most of what we learned maybe may not be new, but when we see the amount of staggering, the degree of staggering improvement of China, very huge, and maybe getting into China, a very different land, a land that is 8 hours ahead of Sierra Leone. I can say everything was fantastic, good, and absolutely memorable. And even when I'm here, I still appreciate the Chinese principle, their hospitality, and maybe how they ginger themselves up to see that China over 3 decades ago is no longer the China that we used to know or maybe remember 3 decades before this time.
And Edward, explain to our audience, I know I tried to say in the intro there that you and many other young people were selected by the government of Sierra Leone and sent to China. In your own words, what was the goal? What was the rationale? What are the reasons that decision was made to send you people, and for what?
Well, that is a very good question. You see, China, like Sierra Leone, was another developing country. Although for African standard, we ran China developed. When you watch at the world at large, especially like United Nations Development Index, we tell you that China is a developing country. But for Africa standard, maybe apart from any political or geopolitical sentiment, one can easily say China is definitely a developed country. You know, this is a pro-poor country, and we have seen how Chinese have metamorphosed themselves from a dependent country to an independent country. In terms of their economy, they are a country that is non-reliant on foreign aid. And they have manifested that into the world and have even overtaken the like of Japan into being the world's second largest economy. And they are now competing with the United States at all fronts in terms of what? In terms of the economic power, military, and whatsoever. Maybe Africa stands a greater reason to learn how we also can emancipate ourselves from this economic degradation standard where our countries are most of the time dependent on on donor starting, because our country, most of our countries' economies are dollarized. At the same time, our country is a donor-driven country. So rather like any other country, is a donor-driven country. So actually, we necessarily to make their head system and to see how the Chinese managed to develop themselves. And now today, they are being ranked as one of the strongest economies into the world, irrespective of their 1.4 billion population, which Africa as a whole cannot even match up to that particular population. Yet, as a single country, today, China, 35 years before this time, was a developing country. China, 35 years after that time, is a developed country, and they stand at a greater stand to compete with any emerging force in the world. And at the same time, they are now capacitated maybe to provide aid to other African countries as we are today. When the fact remains that the same population that they have in terms of the population structure is the same population that Africa is having in terms of our young population. In fact, we have the youngest population compared to countries like China. Then we are still suffering. When you watch at our population, it's so small. Like Sierra Leone is just around below 7 million. Some people even tell you 7. But watch at Liberia is below or above 5 million, maybe 5 to 6 million. Then you watch like places like Guinea, Senegal, Burkina Faso. You compare our population, we cannot even match up to China's standard. But yet they have managed to navigate themselves out of that. They are now strong, dependent. They are now independent, and they can provide enough. So maybe if you can watch from their own way how they have managed to change their poor background to an influential and affluent one, and now they have the capacity and the ability to provide aid to other countries, and also they have now the ability to provide food for their citizens. They have the ability to provide strong and good medication for their citizens. They have good road network. They have a very strong economy. They have a very strong employment system, and there is a vast unity into the country. You hardly had any kind of civil unrest, and all of these things are taking place into Africa. So one actually to observe these dynamics and see how, as young people, when we get back into Sierra Leone, we can maybe restructure our system and see how we can also inject some amount of vitality into our system, maybe progress to the stage of China and have a stand into the world.
Thank you again, folks. If you are just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. This is our program, Roundtable Africa, where the issues of Africa are dissected here, analyzed, and discussed to our understanding so that Africa can gain the consciousness it needs to venture into development, technology, the empowering of its young people, and so that leadership from African leaders can become very pragmatic and intentional to improve the living standard and living conditions of its people. This is something that is very important for the forward march of the mother continent of Africa. We do have everything that we need as a people, as a continent, to be able to develop ourselves and improve living standard. Edward Amara is focused on the West African correspondent. He and many other young people were selected by the government of Sierra Leone and sent to China for 3 weeks for them to observe, for them to see for themselves how the Chinese who were dogged by poverty just around 1978 today are considered as a strong economic power in the world. Technology is strong. Anything that you see in your house today, you will be surprised if you check. You will realize that if not 85 or 95% was say made in China. And this is the China, just 1978, was begging for bread. Like many African countries and Africans are begging for bread today. China is highly, highly independent economically, politically, any kind of way you think about. What can Africa learn from China? How Africa, like China, can change its story? Edward Amara, based on his experience on the trip that he went on, sent by the government of Sierra Leone, will help us gain some understanding. But he fell off just now, so do not go anywhere. I have some questions for Edward Amara. I want to know, is it possible for Africa to change the course of history? Is it possible for our nation, Liberia, to change the course of history? All right, when it comes to poverty, when it comes to underdevelopment. You know, in Liberia today, we're talking about bad roads. This has been our song that we've been singing. This has been our cry. Bridges, to build them has been a challenge for us in Liberia. The Chinese have similar problems. Today, it's different. They are building bridges. They are even building bridges on the sea. How have they come this far to do this in very relatively short period of time? What did they use? You know, what was the secret to that? When did they come to realize that they need to pull themselves off and they needed to depend on themselves and make the necessary investment? When? How? How did that even become possible? I mean, if you look at their population, as Edward Amara was saying, if you look at the Chinese population, it's estimated pretty close to 1 billion people in that country. And yet, despite that number of people they have, they were able to develop themselves improve their healthcare system, improve their education system, educate their people. And today, China is an economic power in the world. And even in the US, it's believed that the great United States of America owes China, that America borrows money from China. How? How did the Chinese do that? Can Africa do that? Can Liberia do that? Can Ghana do that? So that is a unique experience. We will take a short break while we wait for Edward to join back in continuation of the show. Don't go anywhere. This is a discussion that we must have. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jah.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jah.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This
discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jah.
And I'm Anthony Sien, and we are back with you. We want to say sorry for the disconnection there. Our correspondent Edward Amara had a network issue, but he is back now in continuation of the show. And thanks for staying with us again. We want to ask you if you I want to ask you to share the broadcast with your contact. Edward, it's good to have you back. Let's continue the discussion here. This is a very, very important discussion. So, Edward, based on what you're saying in China, what are the places you went? What did you see that marvel you?
Well, a lot of things that are actually in China that matter and absolutely admirable. First, you watch at the Chinese system.
Mhm.
They have a system that ginger political unionism and togetherness. Unlike in Africa, where you see divided mentality, what the Chinese system set up, because you have the Chinese Communist political party, the Chinese Communist political party, that is set up on a socialist system of theory. So you see people work in the interest of the state, and in return, the state provide all their basic necessities. So you see total loyalty and commitment. And there is continuity into their own system. They stick to one plan. Let's watch at Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone became independent since 1962. So when the Chinese took over their system, like Xi Jinping, who came into power from 2012 to 2013, he also met his predecessor. But the agenda of the Chinese was never changed. As they normally say, government is continuation. So any other successive government have to continue his predecessor's program, because the predecessor's work was based on the interest on the state, not an individual initiative or party mentality or party initiative. Everything that was being done was purely done in the name of the state. So if the leadership changes, fine. But the agenda of the country doesn't change. It remains the way. So there is that continuation. That is why even when you watch at it, they will start to analyze their system from 1849. They start to come with it onto this present state. You see that there is one successful agenda to another, because they set their system and they make the constitution and the programs of China like something which is a national agenda. So irrespective of which leader comes in, you have a fixed agenda that you have to improve on. So if one government undertake certain agenda, so at 20 or 15 years, and this person who was the head of affairs is no longer available, but another person has taken over, they are not going to come with a new policy or a new agenda. It is not like one UDPM party taking over power and it met a kind of foundation being set by your predecessor's party, but though you are not a subscriber to his own party ideology, you have to come and change the system to set up that particular goal that is an agenda of the country. So you see, everybody will work, and there will be stages of development, because you understand that from 2020, or let me just say from 2015 to 2020, they set their own agenda. They set their own agenda per 5 years. Like they will now have what they will have, or 10 years basis. And they now have, normally when they are trying to set their agenda, they have a 10 years agenda. That is 1 decade. So irrespective of who is into power, who is coordinating their affairs, that agenda must be meted out. Unfortunately, in Africa, this is not what we are having. Maybe one party who won the election today has his or her own policy. So immediately that party 2 times of power faces out, and the party is no longer did not win the successful election. When another party comes in, the agenda totally changes. That is why you see in Africa, one development, maybe a party comes in today, initiative was to make road. But when other parties succeed that particular party, and that other party that came into power, they will not have any initiative to make road. They will say, we are starting to build hospital. Maybe another person will come in, they say, no, we are not willing to build hospital. Our own initiative is to build school. So you may see that in Africa, we try to spread our development agenda, but we do not have unique system. So the Chinese are developing stage by stage. So they have a national agenda, which is totally lacking into Africa.
And Edward, that is a key point that you are making there, that the Chinese have a national agenda that any government that comes to power follows. And they have projects intended to develop the country and improve the nation standing, and when government comes to power, that government follows that agenda. I think it's something that is very significant. Let me ask you about, we hear about patriotism, the way nationals or citizens of a country see their country, the way they see themselves, what they think of themselves, how they value themselves. Based on your experience when you were there for that 3 weeks, how did you see the Chinese look at themselves, their nation? How did they look at their leaders? How do they think of themselves? What are the values that they share, the project that you see that might be somehow completely different from what we do here in Africa?
I think that is embedded into the name of their country, the People's Republic of China. That is the first name. When you are watching that channel, they say the People's Republic of China. It means the ownership of China belongs to the people. So there is that strong love, there is that strong commitment, there is strong loyalty, and there is culture, there is strong tradition. Culture changes. It's our daily way of life. But tradition is something fixed, and normally we tend to make sure that we pass it on from one generation to another. And all that comes, well, maybe that was strongly established based on the social contract that the government normally fulfills. Because loyalty must come in from the citizen. That is where you expect good citizens. They said any good citizen must be willing to lay down his or her own life in defense of the state, which is spectacularly clear and a very good idea, which nobody should condemn it. But a citizen can only lay his or her own life for the state if that state is also standing in defense of that citizen in case his or her own rights is being violated. In China, you see people are loyal, people are committed, people have their own national agenda at their heart. And that is why they respect authorities. They treat their authorities like icons because their authority treat them as the owners of the land. The authority believe that whatsoever place where they are today, it is out of the commitment of the people. That is why any Chinese is very hardworking. They did not depend on America. They learned from America. They learned from the Western world to implement development into China. But they did not depend on America nor the Western world to go and implement those developments. So that is a huge difference that we Africans are facing. Maybe we may learn from America or learn from France or learn from the Western world, but we still depend on the Western world to come and ginger up or implement those developments. And if you want to develop, they will definitely tell you that was one of the key factors. Do not depend on any other person, whether in China or outside China, to go and make change into your country as the way you want it to be. It is your own responsibility. It is your own responsibility to effect that change.
And Edward, if you can think of any secret that the Chinese use to change their story, what do you think it will be?
Well, the most important secret that the Chinese use to change their story is first for them to realize that they cannot have freedom. They cannot have everything that they want into this world compared to where they identify themselves as Chinese. China belongs to them. China is their property. If the story of China is changed today, it is the Chinese life that is changed. If China is affected positively, the Chinese life become affected positively. If China is affected negatively, the Chinese life become affected negatively. So what they preach is a kind of scenario of loyalty, total commitment. Then they make sure that this thing is being taught into their own school system. That is why you watch. What Africa is learning today in our school here is an imported culture. The Chinese man will never teach his or her own child that. They ensure that they teach the national culture. the national habit of the Chinese people is being implemented into their schools. So they pass it from one successful generation to another. When you watch at Africa, maybe you even start to learn about things in the world that do not concern you. If I'm doing history, you start to learn about other histories which cannot be related to your own way of development, and it cannot change your own story. Maybe they can learn brighter example from other people, but they make sure that they implement it. And their institutions, all of their educational institutions, they ensure that they produce things or they introduce courses that will matter to China and that can make the change that Chinese desire. A Chinese may not want to construct road and will start to ask for an engineer from America, from London, or from England, or from France to come and serve into that capacity. Their schools are producing those things. But watch at Sierra Leone, watch at Liberia, West Africa. How many schools are producing the engineer to make the change that we want into Sierra Leone or Liberia or Guinea? It is not. So that is why each time they produce those things, and when the government invests into those institutions, if you pay a Chinese engineer for constructing a road, he will still use that money to invest into China. They will not make an investment. That is why they even control their foreign account. How many Chinese citizens who are outside China that will be taking money out of China to go and bank in America? They will not allow you, but they will allow money leaving from America to come. Even when they are seeing the trade controversy and whatsoever, it is because Chinese citizens are making money into America and they are investing it into China. And they like, if you watch at their hospital system, their education system, or any other ministry with the 1.4 billion population that they are having, they only have 24 ministers. Look at Africa. In Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea, other places, we have less than 10 million population. And ask how many ministries have. Too many, maybe 30 or 40 or 50 ministries. And you watch at those systems. Another thing they did, they organize their salary structure. If you have a degree and they are being paid a certain amount, cut across, everybody take that same money. If when somebody is into that deepest part of the village, he receive the same money. And they cross their development all over. They have evil development. The development is so evil to understand that even when you are in the village, you have that same facility that somebody is staying in bigger towns. So you will have that loyalty to develop your own community. Unfortunately, Africa, this mentality is definitely not there. Even our schools, what type of graduate are they producing? Will those graduates affect what we're having? And they also treated the agriculture system so nicely. In Africa, if I can remember when we are in universities, and if your colleague tell you that I am here to read agriculture, straight away they start to provoke you. You're a farmer, a low-graded thing. So those things are not there. They take it so high. That is why they're not even dependent on any other nation to produce food for them. They can produce, although they depend on places like Japan and other places to import food, but they have food that can control their system. Unfortunately, we are not so.
And Edward, to what extent do you think education play a role in China changing its story? What did China do about education that helped to change the story?
Yeah, watch out. That is a very good question. When we became independent, what we did, we have an education reform system based on the British standard. America is on the Liberia is on the American standard. You go into French-speaking West Africa, is on this French-speaking West African country. But the problem here is that we are in the same hell, but dealing with different devils. How sure are you that the system that walks into America can walk into Liberia? When they are not even in the same society, we do not have anything. So what the Chinese did, like this, the type of education system that was introduced into Sierra Leone or any other British West African country, including Liberia, which is another English-speaking West African country, was a server education. In short, they only teach you the essential education that you need to learn, how to read, write, and basic arithmetics, which make you subservient, and to report to our overlord, which are the imperialists. In China, that was not the type of education. They knew that they have to develop their own country. They cannot only depend on this bookish type of education. I must go and have a PhD. I must go and have a degree to become. No. They involve into technical education. And we cannot develop without having technical education. Basic things like the production of like this fertilizer, how they can utilize the type of soil that they have, Then at the same time, like this basic ICT system, that information communication technology, they improve on all of those sectors because they are competing at with higher level countries. And based on the number of their population, if they cannot introduce an education that will positively change the standard of the people, their education system may definitely end up to create havoc because they wanted to produce graduates that can actually change how the country was looking since 1978. But just engineers started
Sorry.
producing the agriculturalists that they need, started producing the ICT technician that they need. So they use it now to create manufacturing industry. Even when you have money today, you say you are going to invest in Liberia, I'm going to make an ICT industry. How many Liberians that are actually will fail with this thing? So you depend on expert. And when you come with an expert, that huge money we take to pay an expert, that expert will not invest into China or into Africa, he will end up to invest into another country. So you see the infrastructure will start to dilapidate a bit. But they ensure that those education systems, they only produce the education that will qualify China to develop. Not an education. You will see in Africa, somebody will tell you that I study physics, I have doctorate into it. That person cannot produce a paracetamol. When you watch at China, all of the education system, like where we are staying in the southern part of China, Guangzhou, you see a lot of people who come, they will tell you what they produce. Some of them, how they contributed to what? To defeating COVID-19 into China, how they also managed to produce certain vaccines. Get into African institutions. Which institution will tell you? There are certain institutions that are over centuries into Africa. We have not been able to produce anything on our own. What we depend on is what is being produced into the Western world, and we come to start to implement those programs. So we cannot have control over those systems. So the education system, they use it to develop themselves.
A key thing you mentioned that, the technical area of education, like let's use Liberia as an example. We're talking about, oh, we need roads in Liberia. How many road engineers do we have? How many masons that we are training? How many steel burners our institutions are training? I don't know. Maybe they are doing that. And how many Liberians even have the understanding that if we are to develop this country, it is not somebody with a PhD or bachelor of science, in business that are going to develop Liberia. If we want to build a road to Grand Crew, we need technical people to do so. And do we Liberians see it that way, or our leaders stressing the importance of these technical skills? That these are the jobs that will develop the country, and these are the jobs that even put money in ordinary people's pocket. These are the jobs that make the strong and the backbone of the country. Do we Liberians, see it that way? Do Africans see the significance and importance of these kind of, skills or trades or job? And are we making the most investments in these areas so that we will not have to bring expatriates? How many electricians do we have, for example, to electrify Liberia? I mean, do we see the need? Are we preparing them? So you are saying this is what the Chinese did. I want to talk about culture. From your assessment during your 3 weeks of stay in China, what did you see about their culture? Let's look at language, for example. I mean, did it play any role in China that they have their own language that they use to communicate across China? Talk to me about their culture and how they conducted themselves.
Yeah, I think when you watch at their 1.4 billion population, they have the most popularly spoken language, which is Chinese language, cut across China, and the biggest ethnic group is the Han. HAN, that is the biggest ethnic group into China. Apart from that, they have over 56 different ethnic groups, but the Han have around 91.5 of the total 1.4 billion people. Around 91.5 of that number are the Han ethnic group. But they tend now to what they tend to do was to create a system that only the Chinese language is being spoken across China. So when you watch at how vast their population, one of the major reasons why sometimes it is very difficult develop even to call Africa a United States of Africa is the language barrier. You get across Liberia, you see people speaking English, of course you can understand them. Immediately you cross to Guinea, the story changes. Why you speak to this person and the dialect of that person changes to the one that you don't understand, development cannot be injected. So the Chinese haven't realized that all other places are there, they have the Han ethnic group, which are the dominated force, but they do not have to leave the minority out. So they ensure that the Chinese is being spoken all over Africa. I think we also started that when they said, like in East Africa, they wanted the Kiswahili to be spoken all over because the Kiswahili is the language of the Swahili people. But the Swahili is another tribe. So the language that they actually, the Swahili is the people. So the Kiswahili is the language. So what they wanted to do was to ensure that the Kiswahili is spoken across Africa, especially like East Africa. So that could be used as a medium where people can easily communicate, maybe infect the type of change that they want to do. So China has realized that they created that Chinese. So when you see the Chinese language, it's a kind of general thing. It's like a lingua franca that is spoken all over China, and it's one of the 5 languages that is recognized at the UN. Because 1.4 billion people are speaking that particular language, which is equivalent to 27% of the world's total population. Although India is now on the verge of overtaking China in terms of the most populated country on the world, but around 27% of the world total population belongs to the Chinese. So they ensure that they infect that. That is why, and their culture is almost a one that is dominant, the Han people, because they are felt all over. So it's like the Han culture is almost the culture of each and every Chinese. Then they do not involve into like religious diversity. When you watch at Africa, we take the issue of religion so high. Maybe I cannot even tend to vote for you because you're a Christian, I'm a Muslim. Why should I go and vote for a Muslim? But in China, they get those Buddhism, they have Christianity, then they have a small amount of Islam, and they have other type of religion that they call the Taoism. But religion has got nothing to do with the development of the state. That is why they do not have any fanatic, they do not want to have people who believe in fanaticism. Like, if you are not a Muslim, you will be killed. No. That is like any other tribe or any other sect of people who want to come with a state to impose a religion on certain set, you can definitely be infected. So that is why when you even see the Chinese are having series of issues with some set of Muslims, because they know like what it is, what like people like the jihadist mentality preaches. And when it comes, it creates division. And they know religion is capable of dividing these people. So what they do not have any state religion. Everybody is free to go and pray, but they do not observe religion like the pinnacle of anything. The most important thing is love, unity, and peace, and they preach development, and they tell the people that China belongs to the Chinese. So from their own kids, they will start to transform. They try to preach that culture of unity. So they do not even believe in tribe. Like somebody come here and hang, no, they don't believe into that. The most important thing that everybody is a Chinese.
Edward, in Africa now, we are claiming to be practicing democracy. It's the Western from the government that accurately has worked for the West to the greater extent. The Chinese system, I understand, is communism. Research shows that it's closer to their culture. And they are having this success, even though they have some difficult times in the past. Is there any reason to believe that maybe democracy is a foreign approach to governance and we have picked it up and it might be different from our African culture? Is there any reason to believe that is responsible for the backwardness of the continent and many African countries, as opposed to the Chinese using a communist system that is maybe closer to their culture? What do you say?
Of course, there is reason. In the first place, democracy was never part of African culture. It was imported from the West, that liberal democracy that blew across Africa just after independence. That was why you see just after most countries gaining independence into Africa, the next thing was like coup d'etat, because democracy was definitely something foreign to us. And in Africa, when you watch our pre-colonial system, what we are dealing with was one-party system. which was equal to development because it does not come with a divided mentality and it set an agenda which must be followed. And anybody that wants to run for political office, you must ensure that you support our party system. And with the system, you can ascend from one stage to another, but you must stay, you will have to maintain the same agenda. Anyone who wants to come with a different agenda can easily be eliminated. And when the West observed that, they knew that if Africa can be united into that force, definitely we may not end up to depend on them, just like the way the Chinese still are doing today. So they introduced their Western education, mentally colonize our leaders, and they introduce or they infect them with what they call the principle of democracy, like the government by the people of the people and by for the people, which have a divergent belief and is capable of polarizing the country and creating chaos, demonstration. People have different views how the country will be governed. Sometimes freedom is absolutely good, but total freedom will be equivalent to a total lack of a total anarchy into certain countries. When China observed this, what they needed was unity, development into China. And we all know communism is the highest status of socialism. And people work for the state and share the dividend that they receive out of the state. It is not like giving to somebody based on what he or she does. But as long as everything is available, they evenly distribute those things. So when Europe observed this, or the Western world observed this, they use democracy to clearly divide Africa into different stages. Then with democracy, we will not be united. With democracy, we have divided opinion. With democracy, we will not have a fixed agenda. So with that, they have now the opportunity to infiltrate into Africa and circumvent everything that we have, divert it to their own unscrupulous need. That was exactly what they did. But when we went to China, they did not encourage democracy because they knew that democracy is not part and parcel of their culture. What is part and parcel of their culture is communism or socialism. Russia is competing today with America, not because Russia is practicing democracy. What Russia is practicing is a total socialist state. And if you are practicing a total socialist state, you bring cohesion to the country and everybody works in the interest of the country. That was what Africa needed to have done just after independence. But we adopted the culture of democracy. And to crown it all, even Europe, they did not practice democracy from the beginning. They were having fascism, they were having Nazism, they were having totalitarian government, authoritarianism was being practiced, despotic country. Most of them were despotics. But when they developed the country now to a certain state, that they knew that everybody was equally educated, everybody has the same opportunity. So what now they did was to introduce the culture of democracy. And most of those folks, we are equally educated to understand the value of their countries and to ensure that they protect what they have. Just like in Zimbabwe, when Robert Gabriel Mugabe was on the helm of affairs, if most Zimbabweans we are not educated to an extent that they realize that if they can do anything that will create havoc into the country, it will not be destroying Robert Gabriel Mugabe, but it will be destroying Zimbabwe for they are living for Zimbabwe that they hope to become better. They never fought war. They never went across anything. So democracy was wrongly adopted, implemented or enforced on us, which is definitely not part and parcel of our culture. Because all of those, even in North Africa, to crown it on North Africa, before the Arab uprising in 2010 to 2011, which lasted maybe around 2013, what North Africa was highly developed. Though everybody was crying them down that they're having one party state, they are dictators we are into North Africa. But nobody would have compared the like of Libya, the like of Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco to what a sub-Saharan Africa. They were well developed. In fact, it reached to a time that Gaddafi was even preaching that I can help Africa to unite Africa. It was not because of democracy. It was because of one party state. So what Africa needed by then was one party state. Maybe we would have reached to a stage where we are all equally educated, then to understand the integrity and the value of our state. If democracy would have been introduced, it's okay. But we adopted democracy as a state that it wouldn't have been. China developed without democracy today.
Edward, we see Chinese investment in Africa, giant projects, by the way, you're talking about solar power plants. We have some projects in Malawi, for example. There's a solar power in Malawi, a nuclear power in South Africa, the oil production in South Sudan, and the list goes on and on. The Chinese are making investment in Africa. Can the continent rely on Chinese investment for its development? My understanding is that I think the African Union headquarters in Nairobi, I think it's in Addis Ababa, right? Yeah, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, was built by the Chinese, and this is the African Union headquarters. The technology there put there by the Chinese. Can we actually rely on Chinese investment to develop the continent?
Yeah, we can easily learn. My only problem is that learning from them could not just be based in China. Because most of those investment that is happening today is like coming with a finished product to implement them in Africa, which is definitely wrong. It will not help Africa. Like if Chinese are investing in like solar system, constructing road and doing other things, let watch. Okay, you do road construction in Africa. If you want to invest in solar system, come and build up the system within Africa, because we have the natural resources, we have everything, so that a typical African will learn from those things, because that was how they learned from the places like America and other places. But I think they're offering scholarships and other things to Africans. But Africa can actually learn from China, because China did investment into their own country. They made use of the population that they had, and they control also their population. One of the greatest things was Africa is our failure to control the population, when we do not even have the natural resource or the resources to maintain them. While the China introduced one-child policy in Africa, even though we are overpopulated and we are underdeveloped, our economy cannot fully cater to the type of population that we are producing. And we did not put a stop to those things. So that is why we have to have birth control system, invest into our own population, then produce the type of people that we want. They cannot even allow you to what? You are having a company into China that produces huge amount of solar panels, and you sell them, and you are saving your money into America. They will not accept it. You save your money into China, you reproduce those things. But when you watch our foreign companies, all of those money, they will accumulate them and send them out of Africa, and they will use us to make those money, but those money will not change our life. Liberia is having, I think, the rubber factory, or let me just say rubber plantation. I don't want to call it rubber factory, it's rubber plantation. That factory, Firestone, have been there decades, over a century ago. But they are not, the finished product are not being produced to Liberia. Up to now, if you have it for a rubber bucket in Liberia, it is so high, the cost is so high. When they are having rubber plantation, it is because the finished product are not being made into Liberia. So if Africa is approaching China, how to learn from their development, then they should create factories and also institute them into Liberia, and also make sure that Africans have the skills, have the technical ability to change those raw materials into finished product, and right away we start our development. But no matter the resources that we have, as long as it is only the finished product that they are implementing into China, we stand to benefit not from the bilateral relationship that we're having.
Thank you again, folks. We are discussing the topic, how Africa, like China, can change its story. The Chinese have changed their story. Just a few years ago, in 1978, the Chinese were having all the troubles we're having today with development, hunger, poverty, diseases of all sorts, you name it, and they changed their story. Edward has just come from China. He was there for 3 weeks, sent there by the government of Sierra Leone, he and many other young people, to learn the Chinese experience, how they changed their story, and he is giving his perspective on what he saw. If you are just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. This is our program, Roundtable Africa. We'll read a few comments and we'll come back. The final question is, let Edward give us a list of things that he can say that the Africans can learn from the Chinese right now to change their story. Let's read a few comments here quickly. They want from until Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea unite, As one block, nothing will change, my dear brothers. Let's hear from Keita here, right? We can only change for the best when we change our mind and attitude. We must have a sense of purpose as a nation. We must have high standards. What causes corruption is dishonesty. The three propagandists in this fight are the individual, institution, and the community. Let's hear from Mike, my right, love and blessing from Liberian citizens from the UK. Mike should be joining us from the UK there. Mike, again, yes, it is possible by joining with morally and politically correct African nations like Burkina Faso and the Sahel Defense Pact and disconnecting from states that follow Western agendas. Mike is busy here. He writes again, following only the good points of China is okay, but not the bad point. The West has controlled Africa's puppets for too long. Only a new approach will work. Mark is a busy man. Be respected. Edward Amara and his knowledge on Pan-African values. Mark, again, the big problem regarding development in Africa is heads of states borrow more than is in the GDP of the country. Therefore, China, like any bank, will charge higher interest rates. He's on point here. Let's hear from Fido Klee. Yeah, Fido Klee, right? Hello. But you know, watching from Lawson, I don't last down is that how it's pronounced in Pennsylvania. I'm not familiar with that place in Pennsylvania or Philadelphia. Mike, again, the Chinese kept quiet while they were learning and put up external abuse. Then they made a long-term plan and stuck to it. Mike, again, yes, Indian also invest in their home country even when living and working abroad. Mike is a busy man. I didn't want everyone becoming billionaires. He didn't want everyone becoming billionaires. Otherwise, he and others like him wouldn't have workers to keep them rich. Mark is extremely busy here, writing a lot. Here from Paul. Paul writes, democracy today has never proven to be a form of government that has developed countries around the world. Let's look at Sweden, China, and Japan, and Tripoli, etc. So you say you can't rely on democracy as something that you can use to develop here. Let me read this one from Mike. Even central bank used by all government is a private bank run by one family is a problem. Few comments there. Edward, let me come in with my final question because of time here. We have barely about 2 minutes to close the broadcast. If someone were to ask you for a list of things that Africa need to learn from China to change its story, what would be your list of those things?
First, our political ideology, attitude towards watching the state. The political ideology that Africa should be having is a national agenda, not an individual or party agenda, because the problem does not just affect one party, it affects almost everybody across Africa. So Africa should have a national agenda. Set it out as the Chinese have. Any government that comes in, you follow that agenda. If you cannot change, because we cannot use the Chinese standard to change what we have today, but we can learn from it and create certain or infect certain changes into our own system. Like we still having democracy is fine. We have been used. For you to introduce another system, we create chaos because our millennium now has been used to democracy. We are no longer used to one partyism mentality. So that is very fantastic. But what we need to do now, we can also adjust it to having national agenda. Any parties that comes in, follow that national agenda, which have infected huge amount of changes into China. Then secondly, we can also learn from them that we actually need, they have total loyalty. We need to be respecting our social system. As we elect our representatives to go represent us in the respective position of government, we also should respect them in the first place, and they should also deliver on their goals. Then secondly, the education system is the one that is strongly affected into Africa. What type of graduate are we producing? Those graduates, are they infecting the change into our society that we have? Africa have a lot of degree holders and they are virtually doing nothing to change the perception of how Africa should be run. So the best we can do into this system is first to ensure that we produce the type of education that can infect change into Africa. We should not just be coming up with courses into Africa that cannot change the system, because the Chinese introduce courses that anything they want, it can be generated from the amount of students that they are having and the type of graduate that they are producing. I think Africa also need to revisit those systems and ensure that they have that particular system in place, that whenever they are in need of graduate that can produce the type of work that they are doing, the institutions also should be producing those graduates. Unfortunately, Africa is not having those things. Then also, as we are talking, places like when corruption is happening in Africa, there is that culture of impunity. In China, it is not like that. Anybody who is found wanting in terms of corruption, the law will take a high penalty on you. And everything that is being delivered, it will be. Then they also come with the employment system. In Africa, we have nepotism, favoritism, maybe this clientism mentality is so high up into Africa. So also that need to be faced. Then also, we should be, with the citizens, as long as we are close to what we are cultured now to voting, we shouldn't vote on sentiment. We should be voting on merit. But in Africa, what is happening, people are actually voting for people, not because they know that they merit the office that they want to vote them in. It is because either they are tribesmen or they are unscrupulously bribe, and when they go into these offices, they underperform. And even in terms of appointment, most of the time, the appointments that are being done into Africa are not done on merit. What they normally do, our government normally, African government normally appoint officers into certain offices that will be there not to serve the nation, but to serve them, to become like subservient to them. And we should also be making appointments on to people that matter and that can affect the type of changes. And we should also have our area divided. In China, what I observed that they have their own political city, like places like Beijing. They have their own commercial city, Guangzhou. They have their own electronic city, Shenzhen. They have their own financial city. You watch like places like Shanghai. So in Africa also, we should be having those things. They have their own education provinces. So when we divide those things, you will see that almost every area will be evenly distributed and be given certain powers that they can also contribute. But just what? If you want to do anything in Liberia, except you go to Monrovia. You want to get best education, you must go to Monrovia. If you want to get best medication, you must go to Monrovia. If you are establish a business that you want people to buy, you must go to Monrovia. If you want to get connection, you must go to Monrovia. So if everything is centrally placed, how do you expect other places to be easily caught up into such development approach?
All right, folks. You heard it there. Edward Amara is focused on Liberia, West African correspondent, and he has just returned from China. He was there for a 3 weeks learning experience. He was sent there by the government of Freetown, he and many other young people, to learn the Chinese experience, how they changed their story of poverty, and now China is today an economic superpower in the world. China is a major manufacturing country in the world, and one can make the argument that China may be the biggest manufacturing country in the world today. Edward said they did it with education. They use their culture, they use their values, the rule of law apply. They believe in themselves, and they were to be able to do so. And they did it with their own belief system and culture and values and everything that is in the Chinese people. They believe in themselves. Africa can do same, and our story will change. Liberia can do same, and Liberia's story to change. Sierra Leone can do the same. History can change, and any African country can do so. This is how we will come to the end of yet another edition of our program, Roundtable Africa. where the issues dug in Africa are dissected, discussed, and enlightenment is put on the table. The Pan-African perspective is highlighted for Africans to see themselves in the mirror and take responsibility and charge of their destiny to change it. We can do it. We must do it. That's the only way. On that note, the song that says we are all Liberians closes the broadcast. Edward, thank you. Fantastic presentation. We love you all, folks, and bye-bye.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our